sounds like a conspiracy theory to say that Fox News was dreamed up inside the Nixon White House as a way to, quote, provide pro-administration hard news to the major cities of the United States. It is not. Apparently, the 15-page blueprint titled A Plan for Putting the GOP on TV News has been sitting on the shelves of the Richard Nixon Presidential Library in Yorba Linda, California, all these years. Gawker.com, to its great credit, had the bright idea to call up Yorba Linda and published the memo yesterday. That memo, along with other recently retrieved documents, revealed that in the summer of 1970, Nixon aides wanted to circumvent the network news with their own version of the truth, proposed sending packaged, edited news stories and interviews directly to local television stations. They explained, quote, "Today, television news is watched more often than people read newspapers, than people listen to the radio, than people read or gather any other form of communication. The reason? People are lazy. With television, you just sit, watch, listen. The thinking is done for you." We don't mean you, of course, dear viewer. Then, Nixon aide Roger Ailes, who later launched the Fox News Channel in 1996, hand-wrote notes in the margins of the memo saying, basically, an excellent idea needs refinement and good organization. The idea of providing fake news to local news stations eager for free content was later actually realized in the George Bush White House, as Andrea Mitchell reported in 2005.
On issues from Medicare to farm prices, hundreds of local stations are running stories extolling Bush administration policies, reaching tens of millions of people.
Bob Ellison has that story.
President Bush's choice to be the next agriculture secretary.
But all these reports were written and distributed by the administration and its PR firms, not by journalists.
But even by the early 1970s, Roger Ailes knew it would be more powerful to have his own network than to distribute news directly from the government. After he was fired from the White House, he got a job at a new right-wing network called TVN, which was bankrolled at the time by conservative beer magnate Joseph Coors. Its goal was to get local news broadcasts hooked on news clips the station could use without credit, and then gradually, subtly, slowly inject their philosophy in the news. Its motto? Fair and balanced. TVN ended in 1975 and returned in 1996 when Roger Ailes launched Fox News. Joining me now is Rick Perlstein, historian and author of Nixonland, which I say without hyperbole is a masterpiece that you should read. Rick, before we get to you, Fox News released this statement in response to the Gawker story.
Oh,
we are not going to respond to memos that were allegedly written more than 40 years ago. However, if Mr. Ailes did have the idea for Fox News nearly half a century ago, he would have beaten CNN and MSNBC sooner. Some trash talk from the folks at Fox. Rick, what surprised you most from these newly released documents?
Nothing much, Chris, I have to say. This document, I think, was written by Chuck Colson, who, we're talking about Roger Ailes, but we might as well talk about him. Colson is also a very prominent figure in the religious right now. And this sort of thinking about how to kind of manipulate and manage the public has been going on kind of the plutocratic kind of corporate right for more than 40 years. It's been going on since the 30s and 40s. I mean, the Chamber of Commerce, the National Association of Manufacturers, they were writing hundreds and hundreds of kind of fake news releases that they would make look like they were news and distributing to them to, not only newspapers, but churches and schools. I mean, it's really astonishing that a movement that's supposedly based on a reverence for the free market simply understands that they can't possibly compete in the market for ideas and have to fix it.
I first came across the story of how Roger Ailes and Richard Nixon met in your book, in Nixonland. It's a great story. How did they first encounter each other?
Well, Richard Nixon was, of course, sitting in the makeup chair of that distinguished news program, The Mike Douglas Show. And Roger Ailes was this kind of whiz kid producer. He was like 26 years old. And Richard Nixon nervously makes some joke about how ridiculous it is, the things you have to do to run for president these days. You have to show up on these ladies' daytime TV shows. And Roger Ailes was a pretty gutsy guy. He looked Nixon in the eye, this 26-year-old, the vice president of the United States. And he said, if you think that TV is ridiculous, you're never going to become president. And Nixon said, this is my guy. Pretty soon he was working for Richard Nixon, and lo and behold, within a year, he had introduced one of his fabulous innovations in the fraudulent presentation of news, the fake town hall meeting, which was something he introduced for the 1968 campaign, where they'd get 100 Nixon loyalists set them up as an audience, have Richard Nixon ask kind of prepared canned questions, and then cut them into 30-second commercials while these wildly applauding, supposedly ordinary citizens off the street acted as props for the presidential campaign.
There's a great memo in the documents Gawker got about a TV about a Christmas lighting in which Nixon has a little boy do the lighting. But the memo, this is the attention to detail of the propaganda. The memo says to make sure that both Nixon and the little boy flip the switch so that the headlines the next day don't read, you know, this little boy's name lights the White House Christmas
tree. You wouldn't want an 8-year-old upstaging Richard Nixon. Now, the thing that really comes out of this, you know, it's funny and we can laugh, but all these memos, and even the Christmas memo, but also the 1970 Let's Form a Fake News distribution outfit memo, show how incredibly sophisticated Roger Ailes was about the medium of television. One of my favorite parts of the memo was when the Colson wrote in the memo, well, you know, this is really going to work because TV newscasters and producers are so desperate to get raises from their bosses, they'll want to impress them by having their local senator on for an interview. You know, they'll basically be bamboozling their bosses into making it think like they got some exclusive interview from Washington. So he understood, he got under the skin and the mindset of, you know, these low-level kind of TV production workers, these low-level TV air talent, and understood how to manipulate their minds. And of course, you know, manipulating is what Roger Ailes is all about and what he does so well. And in fact, in 1972, he told the Washington Post that he had this great idea. He was going to produce news releases and make them look like real news clips. And lo and behold, he did it. And no one imagined then how big it would become. It turns into Fox News, which is literally the tail that wags the dog and setting the national agenda on so many of these issues.
Yeah, it does feel, going back to this memo, that we are that sort of post-truth politics era in which we live is Roger Ailes' world.
Yeah, my favorite line also is he says, if I can look down, this will avoid the censorship, the priorities, and the prejudices of network news selectors and disseminators. In other words, let's parse this. The people like Walter Cronkite, the people like David Brinkley are the biased and prejudiced people. The Nixon White House deciding which Republican senators are going to be interviewed, how the interviews are going to be edited, and who's going to see them, they're the honest brokers.
That's the truth. Rick Perlstein, author of Nixonland, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, Chris. Take care.